The room was filled with laughter that didn't reach their eyes. Glasses clinked, but not in celebration, only in show. He stood in the center, tailored suit immaculate, pockets lined with fortune, yet every smile around him felt like a knife. "Where were you when it mattered?" he whispered to the empty air, not expecting an answer. He could feel the weight of fake friends pressing in, their eyes gleaming with opportunism, waiting for the next handout, the next favor. And in that moment, surrounded by all the wealth he had amassed, he realized he was utterly alone. The mansion was alive with lights and laughter, yet the noise felt hollow, echoing emptily across the marble floors. The chandeliers shimmered, reflecting 100 faces that smiled too brightly, laughed too loudly, and glanced too often at their watches. At the center, surrounded by those who called themselves friends, Marcus Lane stood like a king in exile, a silent observer of their false warmth. Every compliment he heard, every toast lifted in his honor, was tainted by the subtle hunger in their eyes, a hunger not for his company, but for his fortune. Marcus had built his empire with long nights, cold mornings, and a relentless drive that left scars invisible to the world. He knew success was a lonely road, but he had not anticipated the quiet betrayal that wealth could reveal. The very people he had considered friends, the ones who had laughed at his jokes, shared his victories, and toasted to his health, were merely spectators, their loyalty as shallow as their smiles. He moved through the crowd with an unshakable calm, noting every subtle gesture, the glance exchanged between two acquaintances, the brief hesitation of a hand reaching for his glass, the careful positioning to ensure they were the center of attention. He understood them better than they understood themselves. They were actors on a stage, and he had been their audience, their benefactor, their unwitting sponsor. Marcus's mind wandered to the early years, before the houses, the cars, the wealth, and the titles. He remembered a small apartment on the edge of the city, where the walls were thin, the floors creaked, and the air always smelled faintly of coffee and damp wood. Back then, he had a friend, one true friend, Samuel. They had met in school, bonded over scraped knees and late-night conversations under flickering streetlights. Samuel had never cared about money, about power, or appearances. He had only cared about Marcus, about his dreams, and the small victories that seemed insignificant to everyone else, but monumental to them. Life had carried them in different directions. Marcus had thrown himself into business, absorbing risk, failure, and sleepless nights with the intensity of a man possessed. Samuel had chosen a quieter path, a modest life with steady work, neighbors who knew his name, and a small circle of genuine relationships. Yet despite the distance, despite the years, Samuel had never disappeared. He had always been the quiet presence, a reminder of the man Marcus used to be before ambition consumed him. The crowd at the mansion did not know this story, did not care. They were drawn to the shine of wealth, the power it conferred, the illusion of importance it provided. And now, as Marcus's empire reached heights that few could imagine, he noticed something unsettling, a subtle shift in the air, the soft retreat of smiles when conversation turned to risk, to investments, to ventures that demanded honesty and loyalty. Their presence depended entirely on his continued success. It happened slowly at first. A canceled lunch, a missed call, a vague excuse. Then invitations dwindled. Text messages went unanswered. The more Marcus's fortune faltered, the faster his so-called friends evaporated, leaving behind only empty echoes in rooms that once felt crowded and alive. His investments, tied to a volatile market and a single miscalculated risk, began to crumble. Banks called. Creditors demanded. The mansion, the cars, the art, everything became uncertain. And the people who had once smiled at every word he spoke now looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to stand in the storm he was about to face. Yet there was Samuel, the one who called, who showed up without hesitation, who offered support without calculation. Samuel did not arrive with grand gestures or empty flattery. He arrived with presence, with steady hands, and a calm voice that reminded Marcus of a world before wealth, before betrayal, before the silent calculations of opportunists. Marcus reflected on this as he sat in his study, the mansion now quiet, almost mournful in its emptiness. The weight of solitude pressed against him. But it was different this time. It was not the cold isolation of loneliness. It was the clarity of discernment. The understanding that true friendship could not be bought or bargained for. It was revealed in hardship, in the quiet moments when the world turned away and only one soul remained steadfast. He remembered the first day they had faced financial ruin together. Marcus had felt the panic rising, his heartbeat loud in the silence of his empty office. Letters of default lay scattered across the mahogany desk. He had looked around, hoping for some sign of loyalty, a gesture of solidarity. None came, except for Samuel, who stood silently, offering nothing but unwavering presence. "You're not alone," Samuel said simply. No lecture, no attempt to console with empty promises, just truth, spoken softly. It was enough. Marcus felt a weight lift, the storm outside suddenly less menacing. He realized that friendship, like honor, is often quiet. It is not celebrated in public, not flaunted with grand gestures or social approval. It is measured in presence, in willingness to stand when the world turns away. The weeks that followed were difficult. Marcus sold assets, negotiated debts, and faced humiliation he had never imagined. Yet Samuel never left. He carried meals when the kitchen was empty, offered counsel when Marcus could barely think, and reminded him of a simple truth. What is wealth if no one is beside you when it falls? Through this struggle, Marcus began to see the patterns he had overlooked. The fair-weather friends, drawn to the shimmer of gold, had abandoned him without hesitation. The ones who had laughed at his victories now laughed at his misfortune. Yet the laughter felt hollow, insecure, desperate to mask their shame at having chosen self-interest over loyalty. Marcus began to act differently. Not out of spite, not for revenge, but from clarity. He reached out to others who had been left behind by the illusion of success, offering support, partnership, and respect. He built a network of genuine connection, not transactional ties. And he learned to savor the simple truths. A shared meal, a walk through the city at dusk, the quiet companionship of someone who stood by him without calculation. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the skyline, Marcus and Samuel sat on the balcony of the modest apartment that had become their haven. The air smelled faintly of rain and concrete, the city lights beginning to flicker alive in the distance. Marcus looked out at the world he had once conquered and realized that real triumph was not in wealth, not in status, but in the bonds that endure. The friendships that do not waver when everything else is lost. "You know," Marcus said, voice low but steady, "I always thought I could buy loyalty. I learned it can't be bought. It can only be earned, and sometimes it's earned simply by standing there, doing nothing but being present. Samuel nodded, a faint smile on his face. It's not what you give, Marcus. It's who you are when the storm comes. That's what matters. That's what people remember. Marcus closed his eyes and let the truth sink in. He had chased wealth, acclaim, and influence for decades, believing they were measures of worth. Now he understood the deeper metric of life, the presence of those who remain when everything else falls away. In the weeks that followed, Marcus rebuilt not just his finances, but his life. Not through ruthless ambition, but through deliberate care, respect, and an awareness that the world's applause is temporary, but the presence of a true friend is permanent. He reached out to others he had once overlooked, offered mentorship, guidance, and genuine interest in their lives. The mansion may have been lost, the possessions sold, the reputation shaken, but Marcus found something far more enduring. The quiet, unshakable truth of friendship that cannot be shaken by fortune, nor betrayed by circumstance. He thought often of the moment in that crowded room, the night he realized the hollowness of wealth without connection. He remembered the sharp pang of betrayal, the hollow clinks of glasses, the eyes that gleamed with greed. And he smiled, not with bitterness, but with understanding. That night had revealed the truth. The world is full of those who will stay for comfort and convenience, but very few will stay when everything is stripped away. Marcus's story became a quiet legend among those who knew him. Not for the wealth he had amassed, nor for the power he had wielded, but for the lesson he embodied. That true friends are revealed not in sunshine, but in the storm. He carried this lesson forward with humility and gratitude, teaching those around him to recognize value not in outward success, but in the steadfast presence of the heart. He would often say, in moments of reflection, two lines that became his quiet mantra. Fortune reveals the fair weather, but adversity reveals the loyal. Presence is the currency of friendship, and it cannot be borrowed or bought. These words, simple but profound, carried weight wherever he went. They reminded Marcus and those who heard him that the world is fleeting. Possessions are temporary, but loyalty, courage, and quiet presence endure. In the end, Marcus understood that life's true riches were not counted in coins, titles, or grand feasts, but in the moments shared with those who would remain when the applause faded, when the doors closed, and when the world turned its back. He walked through the streets of the city one evening, shoulder to shoulder with Samuel, passing crowds that did not know their story. They smiled, exchanged nods with neighbors, and passed quietly through the noise of the world. Marcus felt an unfamiliar lightness, a freedom that could not be measured, a wealth that could not be stolen. And as he gazed at the horizon, Marcus whispered to himself, not for anyone else to hear, but for the truth to settle within him. Fortune may fade, fame may falter, but a true friend, that is forever. Friendship, Marcus realized, is tested not by abundance, but by scarcity. True loyalty shows when the world turns away, when possessions vanish, and when challenges test the strength of character. Comment below where you're watching from, share a moment when someone stood by you in hardship, and subscribe for more stories that honor quiet strength, moral courage, and the enduring power of friendship.